All right, this is the follow up, and we are following up today on a live video I did a couple months ago that talked to the preparation that went into my preparation that went into the show Spring Awakening. My guest today on the follow up is the great Kim Grigsby. Kim, thank you so much for being here, for making yourself available, and welcome to the follow up.
Thanks,
Um,
George. It's great to
you're
be here. Thank you.
awesome,
hmm
awesome.
hmm
Um, so, for those listening, for those watching out there, the live video dealt with my preparation that went into the show Spring Awakening. And as such, I thought that it would be really interesting to have Kim here on the follow up today to present a different perspective on basically the same subject. Kim and I were Kim had the distinguished honor and job to be the MD of Spring Awakening, which meant that her perspective was entirely different than mine. Me being the bass player of the show and Kim being the MD and conductor, where all of a sudden you have to, not, I shouldn't say all of a sudden, but where you have to deal with a variety of issues, a variety of subjects, a variety of situations that I, as the bass player, would never really encounter. So, as such, Kim was the one who was responsible for, singers being on pitch and on time and in time, and vocal arrangements being the same night after night. She was in charge of the band being, the way we were and producing the same, night after night. Um, and so a completely different perspective from different angle on the same subject, which was this show, right? um, and on top of that, uh, both Kim and I had to deal with the sits how shall I put this? The fact that nobody had ever heard this music before. So this was all original music. This was not a revival. This was sort of we had to put this. We had to come up with an aesthetic for the sound of the show. And as such, let's jump right in. Kim, what was your introduction to the material to the music material of Spring Awakening?
my introduction was um, listening to demos of Duncan
Mm-hmm.
singing this music in early in its stages, and there had been some previous readings of the show before I got involved, and so they had some recordings from that
Mm-hmm.
for me to, and immediately I was excited about this music being on the stage, on a Broadway stage,
Right.
um, and not only Duncan's music, but also Stephen's lyrics
Mm.
were uh, just really exciting to me. Something that every person could listen to it and put their own experience into it,
Right.
and therefore relate to it and have uh, understand where these characters were coming from. And I
Right.
also was interested in the fact that they wanted to keep the story in the 19th century, but then have this music
Right.
of the 20. Were we in the 21st century at this point? Yes.
Yes.
All the years. Yeah, to keep this time, it was 2006. Um, and it didn't feel, I mean, the microphones coming out or coming down or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
uh, were Michael's idea
Right.
of how we could justify using these types of microphones, which is what this music required
Right. Right.
to be how Duncan wanted it presented.
Right.
But it also showed us um, how this subject and this subject material matter it transcends is not the word, but goes over all
Well,
time
it's
for all
it's
people. Yeah,
yeah, it's extremely universal.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is extremely
exactly.
universal, and it's not
Yeah,
it's not
not just through culture, but through time.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah, and
yeah, yeah,
it's not relegated to a period or anything like
exactly,
that. I mean, it
exactly.
might have had the appearance of a period piece because they were wearing, the
Right.
school clothes and all of the
Yeah. Yeah.
particular clothes that people wore back then. Nevertheless, the sound was very contemporary,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um, it's
Yeah.
interesting in these conversations, and I've had a couple of them now, for a number of weeks and a couple months now. You're the first one who actually points out the lyrics,
Mm.
which is somewhat unusual. Like very often, be it me asking the question or
Mm.
the guests' background or where they're coming from.
Yeah.
It I find that's a very interesting take on the situation, like taking the lyrics into account, and it's something that perhaps is of greater value to people watching and listening out there,
I
because after all we are interpreting not only a musical aesthetic but an overall aesthetic, right?
Yes, 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 and
So
we're telling stories, and so for us to relate to the character, have um, sympathy or empathy for the character, the lyrics are what's going to give us insight into what's going on with them and their actions, and
mm,
where they're coming from. And also from a music director standpoint, I teach the lyrics to the singers, and so we,
there you
and I have
go.
to work with Michael, I mean with the
Mm,
director also, about what are we how what word are we putting emphasis on,
yeah,
or how do we want to color this, or working with Duncan,
right.
saying how do we want to phrase this, and what is the word that is most important to you, or why is that word on that note, that high note, being held for that amount of time. So that,
Mm.
yeah, so the words are very much a part of how what I'm having to deal with.
Oh, that's deep.
um,
That's
yeah,
very deep. I mean,
yeah,
that
I feel
that
so.
right that
Go ahead.
right there is like a unique perspective. I mean,
Yeah.
that's certainly, to a certain degree, of course, that is something that I in the bass chair am aware of.
Yes.
This I am definitely listening
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
hearing it and all of that.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I don't have that close of an interaction with
Right.
with the
Right.
lyrics of it.
Right. Right.
Um,
You all, although you all know immediately when somebody sings the wrong lyric.
oh yeah, oh yeah. This
So you are very, to see music in any show I do, and
yeah.
somebody on stage sings a different lyric, all the musicians go whoop.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing is, and that's somewhat, that's sort of a double-sided sword. Like with being in a pit,
Yeah.
after some time you do get used to it, right?
Yes.
So
You're
there
right.
is there is the possibility or the danger
Yes.
of to a certain degree zoning out, right?
Correct.
The minute something different happens, we're like chipmunks. We're like, what?
Yeah.
Where,
Yeah.
where am I? Where, am I
Yeah.
still?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you have experienced that as well, but there is plenty of just heart-stopping, action where all of a sudden something, or we perceive something to be different, and
Yes.
it might not have happened at all,
Yeah.
but it seems to us like, oh damn, this I didn't hear my cue, I didn't
Yes.
hear
Yeah.
this, that, and
Right.
the other,
Right.
and
Right.
it's like, what's
That's right.
happening?
Tiny little thing can throw us
Oh,
off the trail.
oh yeah, and how, and
But you
how?
know what? I feel like Spring Awakening, because we were on stage, it was less likely that we were gonna zone out. I mean,
Yeah.
unless, I mean, I think it's important that people take a day off here and there, just
Oh yeah.
because we're humans and we need to, reset a little bit, not do the same
Oh
thing
yeah.
over and over again.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
feel like that was good, that we were engaged with the action, um, and not really with the audience right there. Not
Yeah.
really, but
Yeah.
definitely a
Yeah.
performance rather than being it and just this extra, this thing down there, which I never think of it as that way, but sometimes people forget we're down there and it's not a recording.
I mean, yeah, there's people do get. I don't remember like how many times. Especially now with Ain't Too Proud, we get that a lot. Like, oh, you guys are really playing, you
Because
know.
you're off the stage, right? We don't see you until the very end. Yeah,
Exactly. At the
yeah,
very end, now all of a sudden, then there's the big
yeah,
reveal, right?
yeah. Right.
And also, I mean, to our credit, people are, and this is also coming from musicians who were there at the time, right?
Uh-huh.
They are giving us a big compliment by saying, "You guys sound like the recording."
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
that is pretty deep, and
Yeah.
we certainly had moments where people were just very taken by it
Yeah.
and borderline emotional by the fact that the band sounded the way it did or
Yeah,
does.
amazing. Well, it
But
does. It does.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate that. Nevertheless, coming back to Spring Awakening, there is, I mean, there is, of course, there's a lot of there's an aesthetic to the music, right?
Mhm,
Now you could
mhm,
very easily say, okay, well, that's coming from Duncan, and it'll be completely correct because he wrote the music, right?
mhm,
There's
mhm,
Duncan's aesthetic, there's Steven Sader's aesthetic. I thought like the two of them
mhm,
together
mhm,
always kind of steered that ship, so to speak, right?
mhm,
And
mhm.
then there were certain introductions, like say a Simon Hale, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And the lady who did
Anne Marie Milazzo.
Anne Marie
Yes.
Milazzo, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so how do you like? How do you put all of these together, and how do you kind of like what do you filter that through in your own aesthetic? Because I know what, like, when I got, just to give you the
Yeah.
analysis that
Yes.
I came
Yes.
to,
Yeah.
when I got, like, when I heard the music and when I got the little bit of notes that at the beginning at Baruch, right? It
Mhm.
was it was sort of okay. I got like a couple topics. Okay, I can
Yeah.
sort of put this over here, and I need to listen to this band and be a little more over here, and stylistically, right? So my question to you is, what what sort of aesthetics or what styles of music, what genres were were in your
Mm,
background, or what did you
mm,
draw from
mm.
to get the product out?
Well, I'm going to say, George, most of my work I do is new work.
Yeah.
And so when I learn that I'm going to be working with a composer,
Hmm.
I just immerse myself in their music.
Okay.
So because I feel like my job is to figure out what is going on inside their head or their soul that they
Right.
want to get across. And then I have to have the actors understand, help the musicians, help the orchestrator, like, to understand how we're going to all serve Duncan's vision
Right.
musically. And so I just listened to a lot of his music. I only
Okay.
knew the one hit tune that he and then
Barely
and I'd
breathing. Yeah.
also actually the way I actually worked with Duncan a little bit before Spring Awakening, which is when he told me about, like, he had done a written some music for Twelfth Night in the Park, Shakespeare in
Okay.
the Park, and
Okay.
I think it was in 2001. I think I can't remember, 2001 or 2002. One of the I can't. And at the end of that, he said, I'm working on this thing with Michael Mayer. And then later, several years later, is when I heard from them. So I had a quick experience with Duncan, and he is an amazing guitar player,
Right.
and he thinks he has this different. He's always alternate tuning,
Right.
and the atmospheric thing going on always, with the electron. So I understood his aesthetic, so I was just trying to him help it, arrive there
Right.
on
Right.
stage, because then we have to put it through the lens of music theater, which
Right.
is that is a different experience than a rock concert.
Right.
In an arena, like, we do have to understand the lyric,
Okay.
and because people are gonna go, why, and that was a big thing for Michael Mayer,
Right.
about the diction and understanding it. But then if you listen to Duncan sing, he's not going to over articulate, and it would make him crazy if it was
Right.
over articulated, because that's not his aesthetic, so to
Right. Right.
speak.
Right. Right. Right.
And then to listen to how he phrases. Um, so it's so funny. I'm going back to the language, because I have
Mm.
to say, musically, this is what I thought. Like, we've put together a great band,
Mm.
and it was my you all are he's and what I did is, I understand you guys just went off in a room and played through the charts, and he's like, yeah, yeah, great, keep that, do that, yeah, great. I mean, it was basically you all did the orchestrations of Spring Awakening. It was the
To a
band.
certain degree. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
This.
mean, orchestrations in that we all heard the demos,
Right.
Duncan played, and
Yeah.
then, and there were chord chart. Like, he wrote the music,
Yeah.
but then it's like a band gets
Right.
together and you have a chord chart, well,
Right.
chord chart, you have to interpret it as the musician,
Yeah.
as the player, you know. And so then I felt like you all together with Duncan,
Yeah.
I guess I did the piano parts, but
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was all together. And then in terms of, and he and Simon Hale had worked together
Right.
before.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I knew
They.
Simon understood, the string writing
Yeah.
for that didn't happen until Broadway though,
No,
right?
that didn't. It didn't happen until
Right, because
Broadway.
we
Yeah.
added we added the other two string players on Broadway. It was just Ben on cello for
Exactly. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
off Broadway.
For
Yeah,
off Broadway. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then Anne-Marie. So when they were talking about vocal arrangements, I had just a few months before had met Anne-Marie on working on one of her pieces that she had written,
Okay.
and I couldn't believe what she was coming up with in terms of and how her brain works.
Mm.
I'm like, I think this. I just felt like it would be a good match
Mm.
for that. And so, but Anne-Marie doesn't write music down, so we would get these discs. So she
Mm.
just sings each part, and
Mm.
and so we had to listen to part and decide who was going to sing what part, and then only really arrange it after all the kids learned their parts and we could balance it and pick and choose
Right.
and maybe change some things.
Right.
So it
Right.
was
Right.
very much an evolution of a score
Mm.
rather than somebody sitting in another room writing it down and handing it to us, on ink and we learn it. It was very much, it all was born through all of us
Mm.
together, which I also feel like is why it was successful. It's because we all were on the same page creating it, having these discussions and working it
Right.
out. And I will say the advantage of doing a new piece when you say, people haven't heard it,
Mm.
is that people haven't heard it.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
have a preconceived idea or they can't compare it to something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our job is to present it in a way that because sometimes it's hard for people to accept new things right away.
Oh yeah.
So to present it in a way that there were some familiar aspects that they could lock in or
Lock into. Yeah.
decide.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Most definitely.
yeah.
I thought that the just to do a very very quick and rudimentary comparison, but Spring Awakening and then Memphis. Like Memphis was my
Mm,
second show,
mm-hmm.
and obviously with Memphis you have the title, is already sort of a giveaway, but then people
Right.
had to go there and listen to the music and we're like, well, this doesn't sound like Memphis, this doesn't
Mm,
sound like Stax,
mhm.
this doesn't
Right,
sound like
right,
any of the Otis Redding recordings and all of that, right?
right,
So there was somewhat of an uphill battle what
right.
that is concerned, just to get past the preconceived notion, good or
Yes,
bad. This it,
right.
it doesn't really matter. With Spring Awakening, that was not necessarily the case. Perhaps
Mm.
there was perhaps a notion of subject matter being somewhat risque or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
which I always found ridiculous. But I'm born and raised in Europe,
I
so
was gonna say you.
I have a different measuring
Yes,
stick. It's just
yes, yeah,
it's that's a whole nother story.
yeah,
But
yeah.
and nobody ever talked about the suicide on stage.
I know it, but they did talk. What do you mean nobody? You mean like the press
The
or
press,
media
was
like that?
no
Yeah,
mention of. I mean, sure, they probably
yeah.
got some sort of parental guidance rating or whatever, but
Oh, right. Oh, right, right, right. Yeah,
predominantly about the sex, and there was
yeah,
no mention,
yeah.
at least from what I can remember. Like even in the New York Times review, there's no mention that dude offs
I
himself on
see.
stage.
But maybe they didn't want to give it away. Maybe they wanted to give it away and have it be a surprise when that happened. So the experience.
Perhaps, yeah,
I mean,
perhaps.
he was the actor who. I mean, John Gallagher Jr. won the Tony for that
Oh yeah,
portrayal. So
yeah.
it was the role was celebrated.
Oh
You know.
yeah.
And I also know that we got a lot of letters from parents and grandparents and
Oh
kids
wow.
who saw the show, and a lot of times it was about that particular storyline where there were
Interesting.
kids that would write and say, I didn't know anybody else felt this way. and i
Mm.
and so and I feel like we all of us, by telling that story in a beautiful accessible way, were possibly able to help some kids. I know that
Okay.
the grandparents and the parents would say thank you for allowing a dialogue to begin.
Right. Right.
So that's I feel. I mean, I'm proud of that show for so many reasons, but that is like top of the list.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, most
I
definitely.
think we as
This,
artists can help people see the world in a different way and allow them to move through it
yeah, yeah.
easier. Is
And
a
I mean, especially
honor.
by
Yeah.
recognizing, some very universal themes that
Yes.
we all like, and that's again, that's where we're coming back to the lyrics, to the subject matter, to the book of the show, where all of
Yeah.
a sudden, like, all of these themes are something that we all go through. We all there's not a single adult I know who hasn't gone through puberty.
Right.
Some of them are still there. Okay. This
Yes.
It's reality. I mean, just
Yeah.
keeping it real. But we all go through it, right? And we all go
Yeah.
through these moments of to use the term angst, yeah, that
It's natural. I mean, it's natural, right? The
yeah.
hormones are changing. I mean, it's just it's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
all of a sudden, again, I shouldn't say all of a sudden I'm trying to get rid of all of that. But you have this project that speaks to a very universal theme, where all of us where people do see themselves
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
whatever is being
Yes.
presented on stage.
Exactly.
And that I thought was really fascinating to notice, and especially from now my perspective as a musician, as the bass player of the show, to interpret that one way or the other. Because
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
always feel, and this might be a question for you as well, but I always feel like, as musicians, especially nowadays, we're now 2020, back then it was 2006. um, so we have a number of songs to kind of, or we have a catalog to draw from, of sounds, of songs, of emotions, of memories, of all of that, and we have a bag to kind of reach into, where in our own mind we identify certain songs, memories, emotions with certain songs, with
Mhm.
certain musical
Absolutely.
periods and whatnot, right?
Yes.
So in a lot of ways we are reaching into that bag, getting stuff out, and then presenting it and basically communicating with that, right?
Yes. Yes.
um, and hopefully getting our point across to the audience, where they have that same feeling, right, that
Yes.
we are trying to convey.
Yes.
So my question, I guess, to you would be, what, and this is somewhat connected with the last question, but what were you, aside from Duncan's music, right?
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
were you connecting it to?
What was I connecting it to?
Or what was the music reminding you of? Like, there's always something that the music reminds you of. Let me just give you,
Yeah, give me an example, because this is
while you think about it. The
yeah.
reason why I'm asking that question is because, again, like, I'm getting that question a lot of times. Like, where do you come up with your parts, right?
Yeah.
Where do you
Yeah.
come up with your aesthetic or with your approach towards something, right?
Uh,
And the best answer that I have is, well, this sounded like this to me, right?
yeah, I just don't think that way.
Okay, okay,
You know,
that's cool.
I get very frustrated, not with anybody else, but with myself,
Mm,
because I'll be in meetings when we're working on a new song, and there's some people who have a reference for
right,
every song.
right.
I, and I'm interested in things that I've never heard before. And if it
Mm,
sounds like something else, then I'm like, well, then then write something original. Like, don't,
mm,
but I get it as a musician who's having to make up their part, then if you're not then you are going to get take from what you have. My part, the piano part, was just simple, is basically staying out of the way. I was just
right.
sort of basically putting pads down, and but then the few figures that I did have,
Mm-hmm.
Duncan had already written. So
Okay.
like all that's known, boo doo 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 doo, that was
Yeah.
Duncan,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then the harpsichord part for Word of Your Body,
Right.
that was Duncan. I didn't. I The only parts that I sort of made up were blue.
What was the name of
When
that song?
it was it was also a song, Blue. Oh, for goodness sakes, what's wrong
I
with
want
me?
to say Blue Night
Don't Do
or
Sadness and whatever her song was.
Yeah,
Blues.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so
Was
embarrassing.
it Blue Harvest? No, it
No.
wasn't Blue Harvest. That's a Family Guy thing.
This okay,
I'm
we can't do it. Anyway,
I'm looking it up as
look
well.
it up. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh, it's so sorry. Uh, Blue Wind.
Blue Wind. There you
Blue
go.
Wind,
Yeah.
Blue Wind, and that part, I would play that differently every night.
Right,
Like you know, just where things were just, I mean, subtly, but you
right,
know, just like where based on how they were. Um, but again, you know what? I was just basing it really on listening to Duncan play. Like, oh, that's how he's hearing it. Like, if
right,
I did get too fancy, my background is a classical pianist. If I tried
right,
to get, he would be like, ah, like he would not want
right,
to.
right, right, right. No,
So,
that.
so, because that's, I mean, that's the other thing is I've made my living on Broadway doing a lot of rock, pop, rock, like that kind of stuff.
Mm,
And so my classical background doesn't come into play
right.
except for I know how to play the piano.
Well, I
That's,
mean, but that's a big part of it. I mean,
yeah,
you do have to know
yeah,
how to do that, and
yeah,
you have to know how harmony works. You have
yeah,
to know,
right,
music
yeah,
theory.
yeah,
You have to understand intricacies, and this is where your job comes in,
yeah,
of vocals of various voices blending,
yes,
or what, how
yes,
do we achieve a
yeah,
blend, and all of that. So
yeah.
that's this not to be underestimated at all. Like
Yeah, and
that's
the most I've learned was it's best to keep space
yeah.
because we're all playing, and just to be aware of what everyone else is doing rather than try to get in there and be busy and
Right, right.
you know, and like, oh, I think this will be really cool. Like, I just feel like I'm just gonna sit here and let George do that, or let
Mm,
Tad do that,
mm.
or Olivier. You know, if like everybody had, and the piano was not, except for those two songs that I just mentioned, the piano
Mm.
was not that big deal. Oh my gosh, and the harmonium. I mean,
Oh,
that was really fun. It was all about color, which I do respond to. I love
okay.
color, and I love the colors that were created in that show. I also loved, you know that for a second we were going to have a harpsichord on stage,
Oh
but
wow,
then
I had no idea.
yes,
That's
we
great.
figured it out. We figured out the budget of it. We figured out, and I was so excited to have an electric guitar and a harpsichord on stage playing in the stage. And that is a live. That was me playing a harpsichord in those two songs that I pushed the button and we all played to the loop.
Mm,
Um, so that was also fun that where we are, we didn't have a click track in that
right,
show, but we
right,
played with loops and
right.
which was a very much a part of how Duncan's music,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
worked. And then all that atmospheric stuff and Mirror Blue Night
Mm-hmm.
and I Believe,
Right.
it was a yeah, it was a great experience. But I have to say, to take my background, I didn't have any background in that.
Right, 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 right. No, no,
That type of
I
music,
get
I
it.
totally just learned on the spot and learned from you all. Like
Yeah,
I just sit there as a music. Like my job is to make sure we're all musicians,
right.
actors, all on the same page, and we're all together creating and serving Duncan's vision, or the composer, whoever it is, vision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I learn about it as we do all of that. Rather,
Mm, mm. Well, that's a great perspective right there. I mean, it doesn't need to be that you know draw into a bag or whatever. That's not it. It probably also has a lot to do with your job in it and my job in it. You know,
exactly.
you
Exactly.
are like several steps closer to the creative team than I
Yeah.
am, really.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's this transference of communication
Yeah.
ideas,
Mhm.
um, of concepts that I'm in. I'm just a couple steps removed from that, right? Nevertheless, you are a lot closer as DMD, right?
I will say that since that time, though, I draw on Spring Awakening
Mm,
in
okay,
other,
okay,
so it's as you say, all our shows we gather. So now I can use I've used Spring Awakening as example and
yep.
in my bag of experience to say, well, this is how we did this, or that can do, or we can do that. So um,
Mm,
I just at that point, I not. I just come off of conducting the light in the piazza, which is
Right, right, right.
that's
It's
not close to Spring Awakening.
no,
Yeah,
one
yeah,
180 from that. It's
yeah. And
completely
before that was Carolina Change, you
okay.
know, so, so no,
Also
but
completely different. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But then Spring Awakening threw me into Spider-Man with
right.
Bono and Edge, and Here Lies Love with David Byrne. So
Okay.
it was actually Spring Awakening was the first one of working with a singer-songwriter,
Mm.
and then they're like, oh, well, she did that, so she can do this. I'm like, oh
Oh,
my gosh.
good
If
luck.
they hadn't heard this conversation yet, or else I probably wouldn't have gotten those jobs.
Well,
This is
so
actually you're clearer though this time around, so that's good.
oh, check that out. Okay.
For me, I'm sure it's mine. I'm sure it's mine. I'm in the middle of Tennessee.
Okay, okay,
You
okay,
know,
okay.
I'm sure it's
Yeah,
my lack of.
I'm on the east side of Prospect Park, so all right, but listen, this so yeah, let's just wrap it up real quick.
Okay.
Basically, Kim, thanks so much for making yourself available today. I think this is an interesting just topic, and as I said, like my wish here is to show perspectives, different angles on the same subject, basically, and all of
Mm-hmm.
that goes
Very cool
into
idea.
yeah, all of that goes into a preparation, goes into an interpretation, it goes into
Yes.
interpreting new
Mhm.
music, goes into interpreting, when people do get to be in that chair, where all of a sudden, okay, now here is the music, do
Yeah.
something with it,
Yeah.
So
Right.
once
Right.
again, thank you so much for being here today. Really, really
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
Of
you for
course.
letting me remember that great time that we all
Awesome.
had. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, most
Excellent.
definitely. Cool.
All right.